treasures of my life who have worked so closely with him for so long. At first, I was scruffy East Village, long-haired. I think I was wearing a pirate shirt that day. And Julie was, you would think, insurance executive, tie, suit. And we kind of circled each other cautiously, because I don't think he'd ever seen a scruffy East Villager trying to sell a Green Lantern story, and I knew to a certainty that authority figures sucked, and I wasn't going to get along with that. But he gave me a job, and I did it, and I violated what later became one of my cardinal rules. I added something I didn't discuss with the editor. I added a time travel story, Green Lantern giving the Earth its moon, and Julie was delighted with that bit of unsolicited story addition. And then we settled into this wonderfully comfortable, mutually supporting relationship. If I went in and my cupboard was bare, Julie and I would talk until my cupboard wasn't bare, and I had at least enough to go home and start the story. If I came in with the thing pretty much plotted out, it was a very short visit, we exchanged pleasantries, and I went home. But it still had some of the old-fashioned, national periodical publications. You'd expect us to be publishing magazines with water buffaloes on the cover. And then we got a new boss, and one of the first things she did was say, no, we're DC Comics, we should be proud of that. And I think that was a real turning point in that we didn't hide in the shadows anymore. It was no longer a disreputable job for people who couldn't get work anymore. We were promulgating an American art form. And Jeanette, being the cheering section, I think really facilitated that.
And before I get to next speech for own defense, I'll pass on one very short story that your speech reminded me of. Dave Verne, who was an occasional Batman writer, both before you and after you, leaning over the bullpen when I was a young assistant editor in those days, and Dave had this enormous gravelly voice, and talking about, yeah, I remember the old days when we used to take Schwartz down to the village to smoke tea. So he may have understood a little more of what you were as an East Village hippie than he ever gave on. And I just looked at this story. Julie Schwartz? Smoking pot?
That old pothead.
But Ms. Khan, who perhaps was a little more believable figure for doing some of those more raucous things than Mr. Schwartz.
And he was a huge jazz fan.
So tell us a story we haven't heard.
I was thinking when Jerry was talking about Joe Shuster that, and Paul, you'll have to chime in here. I think I had just gotten to DC in 1976, and we were having the first comic book convention in New York with Bill Stoley. And
3 weeks after you started.
And there was a problem with the hotel where it was supposed to be. We had to switch hotels to the last second.
The hotel had gone on strike, and we had 3 days to find a new hotel and bribe people into taking us in.
And somehow miraculously we did, but what I was thinking about when Jerry was talking, we had Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel at that convention, and I said, well, are we filming them? We had never thought to do that, especially in all this uproar and hubbub of the switched hotels, but somehow we managed to commandeer some filming equipment, and we got Jerry and Joe on film together, I think, maybe, certainly the last time and maybe the only time. And so we have some beautiful archival footage. And then I remember that not long after that, it was really 2 years after that, there was the first Superman movie premiere in Washington, D.C. And sadly, Joe was too ill to come, but Jerry and his wife Joanne were there, and Jerry was right up one of the front rows, and he cried to see his creation so faithfully served in that movie.
having just done all this ridiculous research to get the book done, I know that, in fact, the next person to show up chronologically is Mr. Lee, doing a Batman black and white story.
Yeah, my story actually goes back to when I was a fan. I was in college in 1986. I was a senior, and I'd been collecting comics, all throughout my childhood. And I had subscriptions to actually a bunch of Marvel books. But it was actually the DC books that really captured my imagination at the time. It was 1986, so Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, I think the Howard Chaykin Shadowrun. And I remember at the time there wasn't the internet, so there was no real way of staying abreast of all the stuff that was going on in comics. But there were a couple magazines that I found in my local comic book shop and started talking about creator rights. And there was this very political atmosphere in the industry. And it really kind of mirrored this sharp break from traditional periodic comics on pulp paper to these prestige format books with more sophisticated coloring, different format, different price point, and a more sophisticated storyline. And that it was funny because at that point when I was a senior in college, I was actually kind of disenchanted with comics. And I remember when those books came out, it completely re-energized and excited me about the art form. And I think it went hand in hand with this sort of creator's Bill of Rights. So there was something very tied together. These two things were tied together. The fact that comics were changing, becoming more sophisticated, different kinds of storylines, and at the same time, the creators sort of standing up and demanding, asking for certain things. And that really, to me, was a pivotal point in not just DC Comics, but comics as a whole, because everything before that was really the Hulk and Fantastic Four, was all kind of more or less in the same flavor. And to me, right in the mid-'80s is when things really kind of changed, and you really started seeing the earliest evolution of what modern comics are today. And we take it for granted today. You look at all the different kinds of storylines that you see, from Vertigo to Wildstorm to DC, to Icons to Marvel. And back then it was really all more or less generic, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I love those stories, but it was all very mainstream. And now we have really benefited from this sort of mini revolution from the mid-'80s, and that was really, it was kind of a perfect storm for me because I was graduating college, I wanted a job, and it was just a very exciting time to get into comics. So that's what I distinctly remember DC kind of bringing to the art form and changing comics.
Dan, I think you come in next with Metal Men at ABC. In your weave.
That's a different story. I mean, I always go back to that story too. I was working at ABC, and one of the things I really wanted to do was try to, I was always a long-time comic fan. So one of the first things I wanted to do when I got into a job as an executive at ABC, doing development for children's television, I wanted to do Metal Men. So I never forgot my very first meeting with Jeanette. And Jeanette was so gracious, as always, and your enthusiasm got me so excited because I felt like I had a kindred spirit and trying to make this alive. And for me, that was one of the more exciting moments because we had brought that and we started to develop it all the way out. And it was a project that I thought we were going to get off the ground. I really did. But the best part was that I got a chance to get a tour. Jeanette arranged a very nice tour for me. I'm going to go slightly off record for a second. So, Jeanette, you met me, and you had on a vinyl Batman dress to die for. Because she had this long faux mink on, and I never forgot, she had this long faux coat on, and we went out to this beautiful restaurant to sit down, and she took this coat off, and this vinyl, strapless mini skirt of Batman on. She could have stopped traffic.
Dress for success.
I'll remember the first time you do that where you wore it. So you had this big pink dress with these gigantic buttons, these gigantic plaits on it. So it was just like, it was like modern art, walking around.
Dwayne McDuffie was recalling Jeanette in her sequin Tweety Bird outfit from his first milestone meeting this morning. So, yeah, for an awful lot of us, when I first met Jeanette a couple of years before that, her wardrobe was a little